What if the person you trusted most was hiding secrets that could destroy your family? When I found my wife's journal, I uncovered a web of lies and betrayal that turned my world upside down, and I had no idea just how dark things would get. Reflecting on my mornings, they often felt like a string of routine moments stitched together, predictable, yet grounding. But amidst the daily grind, one thing always stood out: the time I spent with my family. My work weeks were a whirlwind of deadlines and demands, but weekends? Weekends were sacred. They were my chance to focus on what truly mattered: time with my daughter and my mom. Saturdays became a beacon of light, guiding me through the storm of busyness. Growing up, family was my constant foundation. My dad would often remind me, work isn't everything. It's the small, quiet moments with loved ones that truly define a life well lived. That lesson stayed with me, shaping how I approached my own life. Even when I didn't realize it, the thought of laughter-filled afternoons with family kept me grounded. As I started my day, my mind was already leaping ahead to the weekend. It was Friday, and with just one more day of work ahead, I felt a familiar anticipation for the time I'd spend with my 4-year-old daughter, Jana, and my mom. My wife, Jenny, was traveling for work and wouldn't be back until Sunday night, so the weekend plans were just for Jana and me. After dropping Jana off at kindergarten, I headed to work with a clear goal in mind: finish uploading the course catalog by noon. To my surprise, I wrapped it up by 10:30. With the rest of the morning free, I drove home to an empty house, looking forward to a bit of downtime before picking Jana up. I made a quick sandwich and decided to start packing for the weekend while I had the chance. Between juggling packing and snacking, I fumbled a shampoo bottle, which tumbled and rolled under the bed. I crouched down to grab it, but as I reached under, my hand brushed against something else, a small, leather-bound book. Curious, I pulled it out. It was Jenny's journal. For a moment, I froze. Should I read it? My curiosity wrestled with my better judgment, but in the end, curiosity won. I flipped it open, my heart pounding, unsure of what I might find. The entry I landed on was dated April 20th, 2007. The words on the page pulled me in immediately. Jenny wrote about feeling trapped and terrified, weighed down by the consequences of her actions. She described how her boss at the time, Mr. Butcher, accused her of mishandling funds in the accounts she managed. He had offered her what seemed like a way out, a new job as his personal assistant. The entry detailed her hesitation, fear, and the precarious position she found herself in. As I continued reading, my pulse quickened. Jenny had poured her raw emotions into the pages, and it felt like I was peering into a part of her life I never knew existed. She wrote about how Mr. Butcher assured her the new job came with more pay and responsibility, promising to help her sort out the financial mess she was in. He even said she wouldn't be handling money anymore and could repay him over time. It sounded too good to be true, but desperation had pushed her to accept. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. The weight of what I just read pressed down on me. Jenny's honesty, her fear, her choices, they were all laid bare in those pages. This wasn't the life I thought she'd lived before we met. How much more was there that I didn't know? I leaned back, trying to make sense of what I had just read. Jenny had kept all of this hidden from me. The words on the page felt heavy with secrets she must have carried for years. She had written about how Mr. Butcher planned to resolve the missing money issue by fabricating a story, that the funds had been found in another account. This would clear her name, allowing her to move forward without suspicion. When she first told me about her promotion back then, she'd left out any mention of this ordeal, choosing instead to handle it on her own. But as I turned the page, the story took a darker turn. Jenny described how her new office was located next to a private lounge adjacent to Mr. Butcher's workspace. She began noticing strange looks from her coworkers, whispers and rumors swirling about her sudden rise. It was clear they suspected something was off, and the isolation began to creep in. Then, she recounted a meeting with Mr. Butcher where he outlined her new duties. At first, they seemed like standard assistant tasks, organizing schedules, preparing reports, attending events. But it quickly became apparent that his expectations went far beyond professionalism. He insisted that she dress provocatively, short skirts, no pantyhose, no bra. He claimed it was necessary for the image she needed to represent for him and the company. When she hesitated, he made it clear, if she didn't comply, he would terminate their agreement and report her for the missing money. My stomach churned as I read her words. This wasn't the woman I knew, the strong, confident Jenny who had always seemed so unshakable. Yet, here she was, trapped in a nightmare with no clear way out. Jenny described her first day complying with his dress code. She reluctantly wore the revealing outfit he demanded, only to be called into his office for further scrutiny. Mr. Butcher complimented her appearance, but his words were laced with something sinister. He asked if she was wearing a bra. When she confirmed she wasn't, he instructed her to unbutton her blouse. Jenny wrote about how she froze, overwhelmed with shame and fear, but his hardened expression left no room for refusal. Embarrassed, she complied. But it didn't stop there. He told her the blouse wasn't open enough and ordered her to lift her skirt to prove she wasn't wearing pantyhose. Again, she hesitated, and again, he pressed her until she gave in. "Beautiful," he said, before instructing her to leave her skirt raised momentarily. After what must have felt like an eternity, he told her to fix her clothes and return to work. My hands trembled as I read. The words blurred as the weight of her experience bore down on me. I could barely comprehend what Jenny had endured, what she'd felt, how she'd coped with something so degrading. This wasn't just a story of hardship, it was a raw and harrowing glimpse into the lengths she had gone to survive a situation she couldn't escape. What I read next shattered me to my core. Jenny had been humiliated on a daily basis, subjected to the degrading wardrobe checks that escalated with each passing day. By Monday of the following week, things had taken a horrifying turn. Mr. Butcher demanded that she remove her blouse and skirt entirely. Jenny wrote about how she broke down in tears, but even her visible distress didn't stop him. He kept pushing, stripping away more than just her clothes, her dignity, her sense of self. By Friday, he had reduced her to standing completely undressed for his inspection. The following Monday, he took things further still. "It's your job to make me happy," he said, cold and unfeeling. When she tried to resist, explaining through tears that she loved her family, he threatened her. He named Randy and Jana specifically, saying he would destroy their lives if she refused or told anyone. He gave her an ultimatum: comply or face the consequences. That night, she cried alone, torn between protecting her family and confronting an impossible situation. I remembered that time vividly, realizing how blind I had been. I had no idea of the anguish Jenny was enduring. The next day, after yet another degrading wardrobe check, Jenny gave in. The journal detailed her breaking point. She agreed to his terms, trying desperately to comply out of fear. When he demanded more, she initially pulled back in terror, but his threats intensified. "If you hesitate or disobey, you'll regret it," he told her, circling her like a predator. Finally, he dismissed her, coldly telling her to get dressed and go back to work. Tears filled my eyes as I read about the nightmare she had been living while I remained oblivious. Jenny wrote about the humiliation, about how he forced her to sit on his lap as he rubbed her back, insisting she act enthusiastic and never fake it. He demanded acts so degrading that I felt sick even reading the words. That evening, Jenny admitted she stared at me, her husband, while I made dinner, hating herself for what had happened. She cried herself to sleep that night, overwhelmed by guilt and despair. But it didn't end there. Over the next few weeks, Jenny described how the nightmare deepened. Mr. Butcher's demands became relentless, and she found herself numb to the guilt and shame, simply trying to survive. Then, one day, the journal took an even darker turn. She wrote about an internal auditor, Carl, who visited Mr. Butcher's office. During the meeting, Mr. Butcher bragged to Carl about her, speaking about her as though she were an object rather than a person. When Carl showed doubt, Mr. Butcher insisted she demonstrate. Jenny refused. She thought she could hold on to some shred of dignity. But Mr. Butcher revealed he had been recording their encounters. He played one of the videos, threatening to send it to me, to her parents, to everyone at the company. He wielded that threat like a weapon, leaving her with no choice. When Carl returned, Jenny complied, consumed by shame and helplessness. From that moment, Jenny's life spiraled even further out of control. Mr. Butcher began passing her around to other executives, forcing her into situations so horrific that I could hardly bear to read her words. She wrote, "I was now an object, available to all of them." I set the journal down, feeling as though the air had been stolen from the room. My stomach churned violently, and I ran to the bathroom, where I emptied the remnants of the sandwich I'd eaten earlier. After rinsing my face under the cold stream of the shower, I returned to the bedroom. The journal lay where I had left it, a reminder of the unspeakable pain Jenny had endured. My hand shook as I picked it up again, my heart breaking as I glanced at the wedding photo I'd accidentally knocked over. I straightened it, staring at the smiles frozen in time, and wondered how our lives had come to this. I stared at Jenny's smiling face in the wedding photo, her beauty radiating through the glass. To me, she had always looked like a princess, a vision of everything I had ever dreamed of. I reached out, touching the glass gently, before setting it back down with a heavy heart. Just as I reopened the journal, the shrill ring of the phone broke through the silence. It was Jana's school. I glanced at the clock, realizing with a jolt that I had completely lost track of time. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, I said, forcing calm into my voice despite the guilt that weighed heavily on me. As I hung up, the enormity of everything I'd learned still clung to me like a dark cloud. I hurried out, trying to push my thoughts aside and focus on my daughter. Later that evening, I shared some of the weight on my mind with my mom as we sat on her porch. She was a steadying presence, her words always measured and wise. "Randy," she said softly, "you're a good man. You'll do the right thing, whether it's forgiving her or moving on. But whatever you decide, promise me one thing, don't let Jana get hurt. She needs her father. And remember, I'm here for you." Her words sank deep, planting seeds of reflection. "Thanks, Mom," I replied. "I'll make sure Jana isn't hurt." We walked back to the house together, and I checked on Jana, who was blissfully unaware of the turmoil swirling around her father. March 15, 2008, Saturday. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning as the weight of everything I'd read in Jenny's journal gnawed at me. When the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling hollow. The familiar smell of my mom's fried apples wafted through the air, pulling me out of my thoughts for a brief moment. It was a small comfort, but even that felt fleeting. I returned to Jenny's journal, though every fiber of my being begged me to stop. The next entry was worse than anything I had read before. Jenny described an event where Mr. Butcher had arranged for her to entertain multiple men at a hotel. She wrote about how one by one, they came. The first man demanded intimacy, the second only wanted something more demeaning. By the third, she was utterly drained. Then the department manager arrived, further pushing her beyond her limits. That night, as if it weren't already unbearable, she was forced to be with Mr. Butcher again. I had to stop reading, my hands trembling. This was worse than any nightmare I could have imagined. Jenny's words painted a picture of complete degradation, a life she had endured in silence. How could I have been so blind? March 16, 2008, Sunday. I stayed up most of the night, lost in my thoughts. By morning, I had resolved that I couldn't continue to carry the weight of this knowledge without action. I would confront Jenny as soon as she returned. If she lied or refused to tell me the truth, I would take Jana and move in with my mom. Divorce would feel too simple for what she had done to our family. And Mr. Butcher? I'd deal with him on Monday. Jenny's journal continued to unravel more horrors. She detailed secret, executive-only parties, events where she was paraded and used, Christmas and New Year's functions where over 20 people had treated her as nothing more than entertainment. Even members of the police department, including the chief and deputies, had been involved. It was a never-ending spiral of betrayal and humiliation. Her past, long before we met, also surfaced in the pages. She had once dated a man who was just as controlling and manipulative, using her emotionally and physically before discarding her. She had also worked at a restaurant where the owner secretly photographed her in the bathroom. Jenny's trust in people, particularly men, had been her Achilles heel, and I hadn't paid enough attention to the dangers around her. Hindsight, as they say, is a cruel teacher. As my mom walked me and Jana to the car, her steady voice brought me back to the present. "Randy," she said, "let me know what happens. And don't do anything reckless." I nodded, grateful for her support, but inside, I felt like a storm was brewing. Whatever came next, I knew our lives would never be the same. I sat at the table, staring at Jenny. Her face was flushed, her mascara streaking down her cheeks as she spoke in a broken voice. "Now you know," she said, her words trembling. "What are you going to do?" I leaned back, trying to steady my voice. "I haven't decided yet," I replied. "But whatever I do, it'll be big." "Are you going to divorce me?" she asked, her tone almost pleading. "Like I said, I don't know yet," I answered, looking away for a moment to gather my thoughts. She wiped her face and looked at me with a strange mixture of relief and despair. "In a way, I'm almost glad you know. I never wanted this, Randy. I never wanted to hurt you or Jana. I'm tired of the lies, the control, the everything. I just want to go back to being a normal mom." Her voice broke, and she added softly, "I'm sorry, Randy. For all of it. Please, say something." I shook my head, my voice colder than I intended. "I don't think there's anything left to say, Jenny. After all this, I don't think you could lie your way out even if you tried." The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, she asked quietly, "So, is there an us anymore?" I met her gaze, my expression hard. "I don't see how there could be. You chose this life over your family. You've been lying to me for months, abandoning Jana and me for these so-called clients. No, Jenny, there's no us anymore. That ended the moment you got on your knees for Butcher." The words hit her like a blow. She collapsed onto the couch, her sobs filling the room. I watched her for a moment, my own emotions warring within me. Finally, I added, "And speaking of Butcher, I'm going with you on Monday. I'll handle him myself." Monday arrived, and the tension was electric as we walked into the office building. Jenny led the way, her face pale but determined. I felt a fire burning inside me as we passed the guard desk. Jenny headed to her office, and I stormed straight into Butcher's. I barely got through the door before something yanked me back by the neck, slamming me to the ground with brutal force. A massive security guard pinned me down, another gripping my head firmly. No matter how I struggled, I couldn't break free. Butcher leaned over me, a smug grin plastered on his face. "I've been expecting you," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "The guard called ahead when you walked in. These 2-inch, he gestured to the men holding me down, "are my personal guards. They'll do whatever I ask. That includes breaking your neck if I tell them to." My rage boiled over, but I was helpless. The guards hauled me out of the office, dragging me away as Butcher's laughter echoed behind me. When I woke up, everything hurt. I was in a hospital bed, my body battered and bruised. My leg was in a cast, and I could only see out of one swollen eye. My mouth felt dry, and I could barely move. The chief of police entered the room, a sickeningly smug smile on his face. "How are you, Mr. Brooks?" he asked casually. "We found your car in a ditch. Looked like you swerved to avoid a deer." That's the official story, of course. But we both know better, don't we? He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Lloyd Butcher's my brother-in-law. He's helped me out plenty of times, like letting me enjoy a night with your wife. When he called about you falling down the stairs, I made sure to handle it. That's why you're here and not, well, let's just say things could have been worse. The room spun as his words sank in. My head pounded, and my heart felt like it might burst from my chest. They had covered everything, twisting the truth and leaving me powerless. That evening, I sat in the living room, the dim light casting shadows across the walls. Around 6 o'clock, Jenny entered the room, flanked by the same guards who had beaten me. Behind them was Butcher, his presence filling the space like a dark cloud. He smirked as he placed a small gift bag on the table next to me. A little get-well gift, he said mockingly. Some DVDs to keep you entertained while you recover. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The weight of everything, the lies, the betrayal, the violence, had left me numb. As Butcher handed me the gift bag, his mocking grin never wavered. I know you'll enjoy these as much as we enjoyed making them, he said. Jenny stood nearby, her eyes fixed on the floor, her silence as loud as a scream. Butcher turned to her with a sharp command. Jenny, get him something to drink and stay in the kitchen until I call you. She nodded quietly and left the room. Butcher sat across from me, leaning in with a smug expression. Here's how this is going to work, Randy, he began, outlining his terms. I barely heard him, my mind clouded by anger and helplessness. He patted me on the head, a patronizing gesture that boiled my blood, before leaving with his guards. An hour later, Jenny returned. She looked stunning but worn, her sadness clinging to her like a shadow. I have to go, she said softly, standing in the doorway. I don't know when I'll be back, Randy. I'm so sorry for everything. I never thought our lives would turn out like this. I love you, and I don't want to see you hurt. She hesitated before continuing. I'll try to make a deal with Lloyd, see if I can figure out a way for you to take Jana and leave. Please, don't do anything rash until I see what I can do. I can't stand the thought of them hurting you again. She lingered for a moment, then turned and left, leaving the house steeped in silence. Jenny came home around 6 a.m. the next day, exhausted. She collapsed into bed fully clothed, something that had become all too common. These days, she was barely home, and when she was, she seemed like a shell of the woman I once knew. I started keeping track of her absences, logging her patterns, all while fine-tuning a plan for revenge. My anger was now laser-focused, burning for retribution against everyone who had caused this misery, including Jenny. Deep down, I knew she was a victim too, trapped and tormented in a world she couldn't escape. But I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. She had chosen this life, had chosen to continue down this path even when it destroyed our family. Any chance of forgiveness, any chance of reconciliation, was gone. April 28, 2008, Monday. I lay in bed, my mind reviewing every detail of my plan. It was perfect. Once everything was set in motion, I'd finally be free, free of Jenny, free of Butcher, and free of the life that had crumbled around me. Jenny would face the consequences of her actions, and I could take Jana and start over. Everyone who had exploited Jenny would pay. I made a phone call that set the wheels in motion. May 7, 2008, Wednesday. Jenny came home looking as disheveled as ever, her hair tangled, her makeup smeared, her clothes wrinkled and out of place. I couldn't tell if days had passed for her or if Butcher had pushed her to work straight through the night. I played the role of the devoted husband, masking my disdain and keeping up appearances. The last thing I needed was another hospital visit courtesy of Butcher's goons. December 25, 2008, Thursday. The summer and fall came and went, with Jenny working harder than ever. She was often gone for days at a time, returning thinner, more exhausted, and more broken than before. When she did spend time with Jana, it was fleeting. She'd smile briefly, but it never lasted. Christmas was quiet. Jana was thrilled with her new Barbie dolls and accessories, and for a moment, the warmth of her laughter lit up the room. But it was a fleeting brightness in an otherwise dim and heavy holiday. Jenny sat by, smiling faintly but not fully present. January 12, 2009, Monday. The phone call came mid-afternoon. It was a detective. "Mr. Brooks," he began, his tone grave, "we need you to come to the hospital." A neighbor picked up Jana from school while the detective drove me to the hospital, explaining along the way. "Your wife's boss attacked her at her desk," he said. "Witnesses say he struck her repeatedly with a heavy object. Others intervened and pulled him off, but she never regained consciousness. She died on the way to the hospital." I sat there, numb, as his words washed over me. Jenny was gone. Whatever deal she had been trying to make with Butcher had ended in violence. The detective continued, "We don't know the motive yet, but we're investigating." When I finally returned home, the house felt emptier than ever. The weight of everything settled onto my chest, anger, grief, and the bitter knowledge that even though Jenny was gone, the scars of what she endured and the choices she made would linger forever. For the first time since everything unraveled, I slept peacefully, no dreams, no nightmares, just silence. It was a strange sort of calm that I hadn't felt in months. February 18, 2009, Wednesday. I was packing up Jenny's belongings from our bedroom when I came across her journal again. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I could handle more of her secrets. Skimming through the pages, I found no new revelations about Butcher or her double life as a normal wife. Instead, it was filled with more entries about her affairs. My stomach churned as I read. Among the boxes, I also found the DVDs Butcher had smugly gifted me, evidence of the nightmare Jenny had endured and, in some ways, chosen to perpetuate. Disgusted, I grabbed Detective Archer's card and called him. "Detective Archer," he answered, his tone professional. "Hi, this is Randy Brooks," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I have something I think you'll want to see." We met later that day, and I handed over the journal and DVDs. "These detail everything, her involvement with Butcher and others. I can't keep them in my house anymore," I explained. Archer's eyes widened as he realized the scope of what I had given him. "This is extensive," he said, thumbing through the journal. "It'll be helpful in our investigation. But you'll still need to be tested," he added, his tone softening. "Tested?" I asked, confused. "For any risks tied to what was happening at Thompson," he clarified. "Can you tell me more about why you didn't come forward sooner?" I hesitated, then told him the truth. I did confront Butcher. It landed me in the hospital. And after that, he made it clear, if I said or did anything, Jana would be the one to pay. I couldn't risk it. Archer nodded, his expression serious. "That must have been hell." "It was," I admitted. "But I did what I had to do to protect Jana." Later developments. As the investigation into Thompson unfolded, the corporate office shut down the local branch, laying off all staff while they examined potential criminal activities. Of the management team, all but one tested positive for a virus linked to the exploitation Jenny described in her journal. How Jenny contracted it wasn't fully determined, but thankfully, Jana and I were not infected, a small relief amidst the chaos. A call from my insurance company brought unexpected news: Jenny's life insurance claim had been settled. Jana was the sole beneficiary of a $1 million policy. It was a bittersweet moment. The money could provide stability for Jana's future, but no amount of money could erase what we'd endured. A local attorney later advised me to sue Thompson for Jenny's wrongful death. "You have a strong case," he assured me, detailing how the company's negligence contributed to everything that had happened. I didn't know much about the law, but I agreed to proceed. Months later, we reached a settlement of $1.5 million. While a significant portion went to legal fees, it was another step toward rebuilding our lives. December 25, 2009, Friday. Jana and I spent Christmas at my mom's house that year, far away from the chaos that had consumed our lives. It was a quiet holiday, just me, Jana, and my mom, sharing moments of peace. Jana played with her new Barbie dolls, her laughter filling the room, a welcome sound after such a dark period. Though my lawyer had taken a significant share of the settlement, the financial stability it provided allowed me to make some crucial decisions. I sold the house, the place that had been a silent witness to so much pain, and focused on creating a new life for Jana and me. As I watched her play that Christmas, I felt the weight of the past beginning to lift, even if only slightly. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. I sold the house quickly and quietly, accepting a much lower price than it was worth. To me, the money didn't matter, I just needed to leave, to shed the weight of those walls and all they had witnessed. At the closing, I handed the keys to the real estate agent and said, "You own the house now, but I still have a few things left to handle. Tomorrow, Goodwill will come by to pick up everything, furniture, kitchen items, beds. I'm not keeping anything. Too many bad memories." I walked away from the house without looking back, my mind already on the next steps. It wasn't just about moving forward, it was about leaving behind the ghosts of what had been. The fallout from the Thompson case continued to ripple through the community, each revelation more shocking than the last. One of the managers who had been involved with Jenny had unknowingly infected his wife and two of his other lovers. The lawsuits piled up, with nearly 200 divorce cases filed in connection to those implicated. Police reported over 150 domestic violence calls tied to the case, and 72 restraining orders were issued. The state health department estimated the healthcare costs for those infected would exceed $50 million. Thompson's executive team and department heads, 12 executives and 6 department heads, were at the center of the storm, their actions leaving a trail of destruction. For many, including me, the damage wasn't just financial or physical, it was deeply personal. I stood outside a white door, my hands buried in my pockets, unable to make myself go in. Inside were the ashes of my oldest friend, a person I had shared every pivotal moment with. We had been born on the same day, grown up together, and experienced all of life's firsts as a pair. We even lost our innocence on the same camping trip, he with Cher Marks, me with Donna Barnett. I remember teasing him about how I'd gotten the better end of that deal. We were inseparable, even heading to the same college. But as often happens, life took us down different paths. We stayed in touch, but we were never as close as we had been back then. Now, here I was, standing outside a door that held his remains, paralyzed by the weight of it all. "Randy," a soft voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see Mrs. Pellegrino, my friend's mother. Her warm smile was just as comforting as I remembered from our childhood. "Having trouble getting your feet to move, huh?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah. It's harder than I thought it'd be." She stepped closer, wrapping me in a gentle hug. "I felt the same way when I got here," she said. "But it's not as bad inside as you think." "Really?" I let her warmth and kindness steady me. "Thanks, Mrs. Pellegrino," I mumbled. "Call me Mary Ann," she said with a smile. "Come on, let's go in together." Later that day, I met with a lawyer handling a trust fund set up in my name. The trust was substantial, over $1 million. When I asked who had set it up, the lawyer simply said the donor was anonymous, though her expression suggested she knew more than she could say. "Do you have anything to do with this?" she asked me directly. "Did you set up that trust in PSE's name?" I looked her straight in the eye, swallowing the truth. "No, ma'am," I said, my voice steady. "I don't know anything about it." She studied me for a moment, her sharp gaze making me wonder if she saw through my lie. But after a pause, her expression softened, and she smiled. Thank you, she said quietly, leaving me with a sense of relief and a twinge of guilt. As I signed the visitor's book and took a seat near the exit, a woman next to me handed me a box of tissues. I took 6 or 7, just in case. Moments later, the service began, with a young man stepping up to the podium. His voice carried over the room as he greeted us, "Ladies and gentlemen.